From Super Mario to Animal Crossing to Pikmin, a handful of Nintendo's properties have found their way onto smartphones of gamers across the world. Considering how much the company has branched out and experimented with the platform, it's easy to forget there was a time where they flat out refused to get into the mobile market. All the way back in 2011, President of Nintendo Satoru Iwata made his stance on mobile games very clear. If we did this, Nintendo would cease to be Nintendo. It's probably the correct decision in the sense that the moment we started to release games on smartphones, we'd make profits. However, I believe my responsibility is not to short-term profits, but to Nintendo's mid- and long-term competitive strength. To provide a little context for this time frame, this is when Nintendo had once again lost its foothold in the gaming market. The Wii's promising success had more or less dried up by this time. Although the 3DS launched earlier that year, the number of devices purchased was abysmally low, and even received a massive price cut to try and move units. But this quote was also before the real heavy-hitting exclusives such as Super Mario 3D Land and Mario Kart 7 were able to push sales momentum forward. But Nintendo had nothing to fear. They had their precious Wii U console that would surely shift the tides of the gaming landscape back into their favor. About half a Wii U console lifespan later, Nintendo had no choice but to acknowledge they were struggling to stay afloat in the video game market. These struggles led to increased pressure from shareholders, and Nintendo began to reconsider their conservative views on the mobile phone market. They announced plans to create original mobile games in March of 2015. After having experimented with Super Mario Run and Miitomo, it was then announced in April of 2016 that Fire Emblem would be one of the next series to be developed for the platform. Perhaps this seemed a tad risky at the time, as Fire Emblem was not Nintendo's biggest name. However, the logic for its selection was sound. A turn-based strategy game could work seamlessly on mobile devices if handled correctly. Considering how niche Fire Emblem is in actuality, especially considering its standing as a series in early 2017, I think it is an impressive achievement that this game turned out to be as successful as it was. If I was, hypothetically speaking, an unassuming person who was asked what Nintendo IP would be the single most critically and financially successful adaptation on the smartphone market, Fire Emblem probably wouldn't even be in my short list for guesses. And what do you know? Fire Emblem Heroes is that game, and second place isn't even close. This game made over $1 billion. That's almost incomprehensible, especially for a Fire Emblem game. So what is it that made Fire Emblem Heroes so successful? Why has it continued to resonate with people 6 years after it first launched? To be honest, I'm not sure I can tell you. For a little peek behind the scenes, this video has been incredibly difficult for me to create. When it comes to the Fire Emblem series, I'm probably viewed as something of an authority figure in terms of critical analysis. I have a greater depth of understanding for this series than most people would even consider having on just an individual game. Not trying to brag, but I know what I'm talking about. Heroes is a game I'm comparatively less familiar with. I'm not an active player of the game and haven't been since May of 2017. In fact, I could probably count the number of times I've opened the app post-2017 on one hand. Regardless, I still view Heroes as an immensely important and impactful game on the development of the series. And even if this won't be a grand blowout analysis, I couldn't call this video series a complete retrospective if I didn't at least try to talk about it. So allow me to do the best I can to talk about this quirky little smartphone game of Fire Emblem Heroes. Fire Emblem games aren't known for their stories and settings, but people have fallen in love with the tales of greatness our legends endure. Royals forced out of their homeland and forced to live in hiding before becoming a shining beacon of hope. Common mercenaries of no political significance, rising up to circumstance, paving a new future of hope for everyone. Friends of unmatched connection, always supporting and loving each other, no matter how far or long they will be separated for. In Fire Emblem Heroes, you get shot out of a gun and are isekai'd into the fan service dimension. Our main character for the game is Kirin. They are the self-insert character for this game. While later updates allowed for a greater degree of customization, they are purely an off-screen surrogate, most similar to Mark from Blazing Blade. And I wasn't kidding about the isekai bit. Kirin literally tells the party about cars and skyscrapers at one point. Well, at least he left the part out about getting hit by a truck before arriving. Basically, because Kieran was shot out of the gun, which I'm not courageous enough to pronounce, he has the ability to summon heroes from across other Fire Emblem worlds. The world of heroes is primarily ruled by two countries. The country of Asker, which has the ability to open portals to other Fire Emblem worlds, and Embla, which has the ability to close those portals. However, Veronica of Embla decided one day to not close the portals, instead using her armies to conquer them and contract the heroes from them to do her bidding. Your job is to guide Alphonse, Sharina, and Anna from Asker to stop the evil plans of the Emblean Empire. The storytelling is really poor. I haven't always praised Fire Emblem for good storytelling in the past, but it's a much different case here. It's repetitive and unengaging. I'm gonna be honest guys, I never even finished the story because I was bored. In fact, I was so bored with the story that I've never even felt inclined to read the wiki summaries for them to learn what happens. But I should also be clear that I can only speak for the story content during Book 1. Over the years, the world of Fire Emblem Heroes has continually expanded. The conflict has reached farther settings, more characters are introduced, more concepts are utilized, and the existing characters have received a lot of development since. Veronica has become an extremely beloved character from this game, which kind of shocks me given how overtly unlikable she is in Book 1. But I guess she won a Choose Your Legends poll for a reason. But for curiosity's sake, I decided to look up the question, does Fire Emblem Heroes have a good story? The results indicate that Book 3 was overall the best chapter, but in general the game fails to impress. Many seem to agree that the story presents a lot of really good ideas with interesting potential, but the writers have no idea how to properly execute them. Knowing what I know about recent Fire Emblem stories, I have to say, yeah, that tracks. So since I don't have much more to comment on with the story, I might as well talk about the actual game itself. Fire Emblem Heroes plays very similar to previous games. However, this game is also the most truncated in the series. Every battle in the game takes place on an 8x6 grid, most of them even being abridged versions of recognizable maps from the series. You do have to sort of stretch your imagination sometimes, but I find the effort successful. This makes Heroes a game that is very easy to play with just one hand, and the other can be used for something else. I would make a lewd joke here, but I'm pretty sure that's the entire purpose of this one character, so I'm not going to steal the gimmick. But if you think this is simply a dumbed down version of Fire Emblem that removes the complexity of the mainline titles, then think again. This seemingly simple mobile game might very well be the most complicated game in the series. Heroes really ran forth with the concepts of what I would like to describe as skill emblem. Skills have seen a lot more prominence in the Fire Emblem series since Awakening's initial debut in 2012, and Heroes is the furthest extreme of this concept. Everything a character can do is tied to their skills. Characters have 3 passive skills to augment different aspects in battle. In addition, their weapons, auxiliary action, and special moves are also considered skills. Skills can be purchased or upgraded with skill points, or SP, which is a stat that grows like any other upon level up, or awarded by surviving combat and full maps. Combat skills are something that have been with the series for a long time, dating all the way back to Genealogy of the Holy War. Skills in that game were incredibly simple in concept. You only needed a few words to understand what they do. Awakening and Fates added a lot more conditional skills that would boost attributes based on different circumstances. But again, these were fairly easy to keep track of. Heroes, on the other hand? Heroes requires you to read entire novels just to understand how a singular character functions. The dense skill system is sort of by design. In a game where everyone lands a successful hit and permadeath is not a factor, there needs to be something to differentiate units from each other. You need to be excited when you pull that 5-star character as opposed to the 4-star ones. This also results in one of the biggest problems in the design of Heroes that is extremely applicable if you're in for the multiplayer and competitive aspects of the game. That problem being none other than power creep. I guess there's really no avoiding it in a game that's as frequently updated as Heroes, and a positive of the system is that it really boosted the popularity of characters that otherwise wouldn't receive that level of excitement. Reinhardt was a relatively obscure character from what is arguably still the most obscure mainline game in the series. But for a while, he was the best character in Heroes. He was so beloved that it tricked many people into thinking he was a playable character, which caused much confusion for those who would go on to play Thracia 776. But personally, finding the optimal teammates and skill setups to effectively engage with the multiplayer parts of the game just isn't my style. I'm a simple-minded kind of player that just tries out the regular story missions on offer. But even then, there's only so much I could get out of this game, making for an experience that is very easy for me to drop and very hard for me to consider getting back into. At its core, Heroes is fundamentally different from the regular games in the series. I would argue that most Fire Emblem games primarily challenge players on their ability to adapt to situations. What are you going to do when enemy reinforcements show up? Or when a decisive attack misses? Or when someone dies because of those circumstances? Since those factors aren't present in Heroes, the game instead demands players to devote much more time to team composition and planning. With only 4 slots, you need to effectively decide a crew that has the best balance of attributes with skills and abilities that can complement each other. Since Heroes doesn't really provide an experience that is open to variance, I find it to be rather uninteresting. And I don't mind that a game in the series is willing to be radically different. But there's more to my reasoning than just the game mechanics that keep me away. Personally, Heroes is not my cup of tea. I have no interest in live service games that continually evolve and change to the point where they become unrecognizable from the game I initially played at its launch. Something about that just kind of depresses me. Another factor is that my lifestyle has changed to the point where I can't really take advantage of the playstyle this game encourages. Back in 2017, when I was only a student going to college and had time between classes, a game I could play for a few minutes here and there as a nice short break was cathartic. Even better considering it was a part of my favorite video game series. But 6 years later, I'm not in that same life situation. I have to commute myself to wherever I end up going, and I don't have any consistent breaks in my workday. The only time I really have to play any kind of game is when I'm at home, and in that context, I'd rather spend my time on something more substantial. There are some things I do appreciate about Heroes. For one, I'm glad it's willing to take some interesting risks and experiment with settings and concepts that might be a harder sell as a mainline entry in the series, like with classical fairy tales and even steampunk. But beyond all of that, there's still a particular reason why I just can't bring myself to play Heroes. And I think this feeling is best introduced by providing an anecdotal testimony. Heroes is a game that is free to download. Where the game makes its money is through purchase of orbs, which can be redeemed to summon new characters. Of course, you can also just play the game to unlock orbs as well, and that's exactly what I did during launch. But I had been playing Heroes for a few months and wanted to give something back for all the time I spent playing the game. So then I just bought an orb pack to summon a few characters. My pull was pathetic. All 3 and 4 star units I already had. Aggravated, I bought another orb pack, and practically demanded the game to give me a 5-star unit, or at least a new unit in general. It didn't. So once again, I made my way to purchase another orb pack, and I stopped. I had a sudden moment of clarity and realized I was already manipulated into spending more money on this game than I initially intended. And that's when I stopped playing Heroes. These games are built in every possible way to get you to spend money. Thankfully, I had some self-control. I was able to stop myself before I had truly made any regrettable decisions. But there are plenty of people who don't. One could argue that it's not the responsibility of the developer for how the players spend their own money. Legally, that's probably true. There's probably somewhere in the EULA or terms and conditions that the players consent to this practice. But that doesn't change the fact that the development team implements these common and well-known psychological tricks that encourage players to spend more money than they otherwise would. And for what? A bunch of PNGs and MP3 files? All for a slight competitive advantage in multiplayer until the power creep takes over again in the next banner? With the yearly revenue for this game trending downward, I can't help but wonder how much life this game has left in it. It has been at least 20 years since a lot of the game's first entries have been released, and I've still been able to play them, even if that requires emulation. And yet, I have a hard time picturing that anyone will be able to play Heroes in another 5 years. Some of Nintendo's other mobile games have already shut down, completely inaccessible. At some point, Heroes won't be able to escape that fate either. To be completely honest, that's what disgusts me the most about Heroes. It is the most blatant example of the series exploiting the love fans have for their games. Even the thought of capturing footage and dedicating time to playing the game was an exhausting thought in itself. On some ethical level, I disagree with Heroes. And that feeling of being principally against the game is why I can't bring myself to play it. When I look back at the success and design of Heroes, I can't help but think back to that quote from Iwata I mentioned previously. Considering that Fire Emblem Heroes alone is a game that went on to make more than $1 billion during its lifetime, it's hard to say that Iwata was right in this case. And Nintendo's competitive strength has arguably been bolstered because of the mobile titles. A lot more people became Fire Emblem fans because downloading a free mobile game was relatively low risk and low investment. It's no doubt a contributing factor for why Three Houses went on to be the best-selling game of the series at its launch. But I agree with Iwata that the ideals and values that Nintendo are generally known for aren't present in their mobile efforts. Whenever I buy a Nintendo game, I can feel relatively comfortable knowing that I'm going to get a quality title that aims to shake up gameplay conventions and provide a fun and valuable experience. There are certainly a lot of other beliefs and policies they push that I don't agree with, but when I play a Nintendo game, I'm not worried about having a bad time. On the other hand, Heroes is just a game aggressively designed to not only take up as much of your money, but your time as possible. To be clear, every game Nintendo makes is a product with the purpose of making money, as are most forms of artistic expression to some extent. But I suppose seeing a game that is so upfront to sell you superfluous digital goods with no tangible value just makes me kind of sad. I'm sorry to say, it's the reason I don't like Heroes, and I find it much more productive to completely cut it out of my life. So why even bother talking about this game at all if I'm not going into a full-depth analysis and I'm gonna be just kind of negative about it? Well, despite my feelings, I think this retrospective would be incomplete without shedding at least a little bit of light on it. Heroes serves as an important milestone for the series. The most recent mainline installment is undoubtedly informed by the long-running success of Heroes, and regardless of my own opinions, it does have a dedicated following that continues to play and discuss it. Just because I didn't like it, that doesn't mean it shouldn't be considered among the series' history. Paving a better future sometimes requires us to not selectively forget the things we aren't fully satisfied with. But going forward, discussing the series is going to be a lot easier for me. We have 2 more spin-offs to go for right now, once again thrusting Fire Emblem into a new genre, one that is not entirely bound to the confines of a menu.